Here we go. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucy Gray, and I'm the co-founder here of Actionable Innovations, soon to be Actionable Innovations Global. And it's time for our regular Friday conversation with an innovator. And our guest today is Sandee Kastrul, who I met a number of years ago at the National School Board Association conference. And I was hoping Ann Flynn, who organized the speakers for TEDx at that event, would be here today. She's come to some of ours before, but she probably has something else going on. But she's the person who brought me together with Sandee. And I don't know if Sandee remembers this, but I remember her talking about, I remember you talking, Sandee, about being a teacher originally in the west side of Chicago, maybe at Orr High School. Was that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Or school network, sure.
Okay, yeah, and you like blew yourself up as a atom or something. I remember you talking about doing something really fun in class, and so that engagement, and that's what we need these days. There's teachers that are engaging and that sort of thing. So I remember that distinctly, your TEDx talk. And then you invited me in to your program for high tea. And that experience really stuck with me. And so what happened during high tea, and Sandee can talk more about this, is in the cohort of students that were going through her program, they would introduce the person next to them, pour them a cup of tea, and then say, pour the cup of tea and say, this is, Lucy, and she's an ed tech teacher and blah, 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 blah. And then go around the table. And then the special guest that was invited would kind of tell their story to inspire the young people in the room. And I loved it. And a couple of the people that were part of your program connected to me on LinkedIn and things like that. And I just thought it was really special. So I'm gonna ask Sandee a couple questions to get us started here. But and these are from Don's, I guess it's Proust questionnaire, not Proust questionnaire. And I don't know how these would apply to you, Sandee, necessarily, but we'll start out with something that's really easy. This is an easy question. What words or phrases do you most overuse?
Underrepresented.
Underrepresented, okay. And if anybody in the audience wants to offer what their overused word is, I was talking earlier about groovy being one of my overused words, which I think is a little dated. I also, Don says his overused word is amplify. We tend to use that a lot in education. And then another one that we've been asking too, which I think is a little bit of a stumper, is what virtue do you think is overrated, is most overrated virtue?
I was thinking about this, and I think kind of the workaholic kind of thing, like, oh, I'm working so hard, I'm always working, I'm super busy, yeah. worky, overrated. Like, it's addiction just like everything else.
That's so interesting to put it that way, as an addiction. And American society has kind of been addicted to that. Like we seem to think that success is built upon hard work, and hard work means that you're working all the time.
Yes,
instead
exactly.
of working in concentrated blocks. And that's interesting.
Like,
I think
heroic versus like a addict, like any gambler or anything else that we're addicted to. We celebrate that one and we punish the others.
That's so spot on. And I bet you're seeing that also. I think also the pandemic has kind of brought that to light. I would imagine, made us rethink that.
And I think technology too, like we really have like a hero cowboy complex, like, working round the clock, always available, always on. That's very much a part of the culture of technology work.
Out of curiosity, in i.c.stars, do you guys talk about that? Do you talk about the boundaries and I don't know.
No, we prepare people to go into that insane culture. So we act insane about it. Like i.c.stars is 12 hours a day, for 4 months in the boot camp. And you can't be late or absent or you're fired. So kind of steeping people in that intense culture and then being able to talk about boundaries and things, like once you've experienced it.
Okay, cool. What's your idea of perfect happiness?
I love that question. So it was singing with my boo.
With your
And
what?
with my boo,
Okay.
with my smushy, with my partner, with my, I think singing with my boo and singing just as good, actually being a better singer than I am.
So the joy of singing, and is it the music, or is it the act of singing? Is it both? Is it the combination?
Yeah, and like really tight harmony and just like making it fit and letting music fill us up, and that buzz that we get like when we're really singing from our heart.
And singing together, like that's another thing too that I think people have missed over during the pandemic is
Yeah.
the act of singing together is different than singing alone.
Yeah.
So okay. And then here's an education one. You can take your pick. Which educator do you identify with, or do you most admire that you
So
know?
identify with, I think it's Bill Strickland, who started a program in Pittsburgh that's scaled throughout the country, but really took this concept of making beautiful spaces and introducing beauty into education, so that
Okay.
our students weren't like working in these environments that reflected poverty, but reflected abundance and beauty and art. Definitely, I identify with him, and then the educator I really admire is Francis Fry. Is a professor at Harvard who's just absolutely brilliant and kind of distills this notion of what are we best in the world at, and to focus there, on our strengths, but like really getting clear about what we're not good at and not doing it.
Mm. And out of curiosity related to this, how did you, when you became a teacher, what drew you to being a teacher back in the day before i.c.stars? How did that start?
So I became a teacher because I was an actor, and I was a terrible waiter.
Okay, that's where now this is coming back to me now. From the exploding atom or whatever it was that you were talking about. So we've gotten some of our Proust questionnaires out of the way. Don is much better at asking these questions, but hopefully he'll be joining us in a little bit, and maybe he'll get a few more in. But I'd like to start out today. We want to hear from you and not me. Tell us. So let's start with your story. What's your journey been career-wise, and led you to i.c.stars, and then tell us a little bit about what's been going on with i.c.stars and what that program looks like, because I think it's so phenomenal and pivotal, and you've really expanded over the last couple of years. So I can't wait to hear what's new with i.c.stars as well. So take it away, Sandee, and I'll jump in if I have a question, and I'll monitor questions in the chat too.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I was an educator. I still consider myself an educator, though I'm not necessarily in the classroom anymore. And like Alicia, I was in math and science was my sort of jam. And I'll tell the story because Lucy loves the Adam story. So, I worked with kids in classrooms across the Midwest. So urban, suburban, rural, kids who had a lot of resources, kids who had very little. And I worked to train new teachers and stuff like that. But I always had a classroom of young adults that I was building curriculum for and with, and would then kind of push it out to different communities. And my students were low income, underserved, underrepresented. There's the word. So my chemistry class on the very first day, and I didn't have a lab, I didn't have anything. All I had were some really old books. And so I'd pull down the periodic table and have everybody pick their element. And that's who they'd be for the whole semester. So like if you were iron, I would call you Effie. If you were gold, I'd be like, hey, you. And then I would have all the kids decide whether they wanted to be a solid, a liquid, or a gas. So, right, like all the cool kids be like solid, and like some of the girls would be like liquid. But the geeks who are thinking like, where's she going with this? Because that's what geeks do, try to think a few steps ahead, would say gas. Now imagine you're 17 and you're like gas, and everyone's like, like making sounds and whatnot. And so immediately I would like separate the classroom. And I'd say, all right, the solids, you guys will sit in the front row and you will not move because your molecules are packed tightly together. And sometimes I would talk to them as if they weren't as smart as everybody else because, they were. And then the liquids, I'd like rope off a section of the class. And I'd say you have a little more mobility because your molecules are spread out, but you will always take the shape of your container. And then the gases, of course, because their molecules were spread out, I would say you guys have all the freedom that you want. Like if I left the door open, they could leave, because they were gases, right? And so immediately, like the solids are like, well, that is not fair. And I'd say, well, then you have to change your state of matter. Or like class mobility, we have to begin to change our state of mind. And at the end of the day, we can't forget who we are, what your element is. So as individuals, your Mercury, right? Like this is going to be a little bit more complex. And on our journey together, you're going to have to figure out how to get the freedoms that you want. And we're just going to use the language of science because truthfully, what every 17-year-old wants, regardless of where you are or what socioeconomic group, is freedom. Freedom to do what we want, freedom to have what we want, and all of those things. And so if all my students were fighting for freedom, what was interesting about the journey is to uncover what freedoms we really were fighting for and to use the language of science, right? So we would have a blast. You would have loved like the mosh pit that we would do for radioactivity and like when your isotopes are breaking down and you're unstable and we'd like chart the rate of decay of all of our crazy friends, like really fun ways to engage with science using the language of science to kind of address what we were going through in life and to get in front of it versus like get behind it and this is something that we'll use later on. Like, how do we use this right now to kind of understand it conceptually and then lord it over our friends and family, what we know? Just kidding. So yeah, and I love teaching. Like, I believe, educators are CEOs of their classroom and that it's all the same skills are relevant, right? Like classroom management, like thinking ahead, like how do we support our end user? How do we make things come to life? How do we listen? How, all of that. So anyway, this was the late 90s for me. And I just kept seeing these talented, resilient kids that were like basically stepping off a cliff because there weren't opportunities to meet them on the other side. And that, we all are familiar with the narrative that certain kids can't learn, they're not ready for school, they don't have X, Y, and Z. And they certainly can't do higher math, and I thought that was all wrong because what I was seeing is that the more adversity kids had faced, the more resilient they were. And that they were developing these toolkits that had like reciprocity, critical thinking skills, creativity, chutzpah. It was all there. But as educators, we needed to create a platform or a space for them to unpack those skills. And that was what needed to change, not sort of move everybody through post-industrial revolution methodologies for learning. And like I said, it was the late 90s, like technology was hot. There were .coms popping up everywhere with like 25-year-old CEOs driving crazy cars and eating Pop-Tarts all day. And so I was kind of like, well, if the world is flat and our competition isn't necessarily the business next door or down the street or in the next state, it's a global, what our businesses need more than anything is people who could walk between worlds. And what I mean by that is like, people who have had to adapt, who have had to learn the unwritten rules, who have had to figure things out because the world of home and school and work were incredibly different. And to sort of harness that resiliency of experience, we were sitting on the greatest source of talent, of creativity, of innovation, and yet nobody could see. And so I wanted to create a pathway that connected our, inner city youth to these incredible opportunities in technology. Now, what I love about technology is that it's creative, right? It shouldn't matter what you look like. It's, and that there's all this beautiful process and methodology that's embedded in doing technology work. And so the big idea was, what if we taught systems thinking? I taught people how to be developers, coders, and use that same systems thinking to learn to solve problems and build solutions to develop community leaders. In essence, what if we were the ones, and that all of our students not only were learning technology and getting great jobs in IT, but also they were solving complex problems in their community using the financial, the social, and intellectual capital that they build doing technology and working in technology. And so that was kind of the genesis for I.c.stars. And it's an educator's playground. Like, we have, each cohort is 20 people. Each cohort is sponsored by a corporate client who gives us a business problem to solve. The team is divided up into 4 or 5 teams. They form their own consulting companies, and then they're competing with each other for this RFP from their client. So the project, the software that they build is real, but we script about 300 learning objectives into a 4-month project where there are these twists and turns that happen along the way, and the student has to navigate and lead. So we're shifting from being students of technology to actually being consultants. And like, what does that mean? That shift from school to work, where school is all about you and work is about everybody else. And so how do we really bridge that? So just a quick example. So the second client meeting, the teams are coming to do Q&A with their client, and all of a sudden a fight breaks out on the client side between the business and IT folks. Like that ever happens, right? And it's over some requirements. Somebody missed the first meeting, and they're fighting. And the teams come and they're like, "Oh my gosh, what do we do? Do we mediate? Do we moderate? Or just kind of like shut up and let the loudest people win?" Or these are important people. I don't want to interrupt them, and all of those things, And so what happens is, back at the whiteboard after the meeting, the program manager will walk them through, like, did you build trust and credibility with your client today? Did you defend your client? And then, on the XY axis, each team will kind of put themselves in a quadrant to say, how well did they do in building trust and credibility? And how well did they defend their client? And like, okay, so what happens next time? So this is all predicated on this notion that really resilient, talented kids already have the skills, right? We're just creating a context for them to unpack all that resiliency.
I think in education, we've looked at kids as being half empty, or being either half, like a glass, half empty or half full. And it feels to me, we've been talking a lot lately, at least with, Bill and I have been talking about kind of the lack of imagination when it comes to education in terms of seeing kids' potential, and the authentic learning is getting lost because we feel like we have to respond to standardized testing and that sort of thing. And it feels to me, coming from a CPS background as well, that we looked at kind of a deficit thinking about kids and what their potential is, and seeing the glass as half empty as opposed to half full. And so this is fascinating to me. This is a different take on kids and their talent. And I'm wondering, I'm also thinking about ACEs, the ACEs study. Do you know about that, Sandee? In trauma-informed education. So
Yeah.
the yeah, so the ACEs study was done in San Diego, I don't know how long ago, 20 years ago, looking at kids, or people with all sorts of backgrounds. And and basically it's a rating scale now of the traumas that you've been in. So you have to have a higher ACEs score if you have an alcoholic parent and another parent who's mentally ill and they've gotten divorced. That's going to be three things like right there that are going to, and the higher your score, the more likely you're going to have health issues as a result of the trauma that you've been exposed to in your life, for better or for worse. But there are things that you can do about it, and there are things that we can do about it with children to prepare them to handle the adversity that's come their way. And so there's been, and I'm not an expert on this by any means, but you just might find this interesting because I think it ties into what you're saying. So the idea of trauma-informed education practices have come out of that study and people's work with kids. And the preeminent person that I'm thinking of with this is Nadine Burke-Harris, who is a pediatrician in San Francisco, who's now, I think she just stepped down from being a California Department of Public Health head of that agency. And she's written a book and she's gotten a lot of attention about this. And her clinic works with families on mitigating some of the trauma that kids have been part of it. And if I had known about this when I started teaching back in 1990 in Wicker Park, it would have, I think, changed how I worked with kids entirely. So for the people who've never heard of this, you may want to take a look at it, because I think we need to change the narrative about what kids are capable of. And anyway, and I love your outlook, Sandee. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So how are kids accepted into Icy Stars? What is the pathway? How do they find you? Do you take everybody that walks in the door? What are the things that you're looking for out of curiosity?
Yeah, so I think, and this is really, from the very beginning, we wanted Icy Stars experience to be not just what you get, but what you give. And that one of the biggest challenges, especially in this transition from like traditional education to workforce development, I think that bridge between the two, is that we think of it as linear. Like you take this class, you build this skill, you get this certification, you leave and you never return. When it's, in my mind, it's very inefficient. Like it's not until we close the loop and that we make our learners responsible for applying that learning and teaching someone else or doing something with it, that learning connects to meaning, connects to doing, connects to leading. So we're not just looking for technologists, we're looking for leaders, and we're looking for people who are passionate about being a change maker. And so, we will recruit from all over the cities. We'll work with community-based organizations. We'll do, social media marketing and things like that. And of course, our alums are like the best recruiters. The average earning increase for our graduates in 3 to 6 months is 300%. So imagine in 6 months, you're making more money than both of your parents combined. So there's a lot kind of happening there. And that, out of our alumni association, we have almost 100 homeowners. So people who were receiving public assistance are now buying homes. And what's more, they're buying homes in the communities that they came from, because we asked the question, what if we define success not by getting out of the hood, but by investing back in? How would that change things? And so investing as business leaders, starting businesses, as service leaders, as teaching and mentoring in the community, and as civic leaders, working at a systems level to change the policies that impact us. So to answer your question, at the front end, we're looking for people who certainly have the aptitude for technology, but more important is the attitude and motivation, like the curiosity. Does somebody ask why? So like there's a little test in our assessment that, they write their first hello world with some help, like, and so if they're able to do that and they're like, whoa, how did that happen? What happens if I change this, or if I do this? That's the person we want, right? Versus the person who's just like, so, right? Or there's this like debugger activity where the program resets as many times as you want to get it right. We're looking for the person who takes it 100 times because they're like, ooh, I got this. I'm not going to let it get me. Versus the person who, gets it right on the first time. So again, that tenacity, that resiliency is critical. And so we've got some tools to really look for, that resiliency, that tenacity, the passion, and all of that. But we use our tools are almost all homemade. When we started out, all the tools that we found like had bias on some level that just didn't fit for us. And so we're like learning designer geeks and we love making stuff. And so we made our own tools, and the resiliency tool in particular, now we've got 20 plus years of using this tool, has been an incredible indicator, not only of how people do in the program, but on the job as technologists and as community leaders. And that's pretty cool.
So it sounds like you've done some research. There's some data that's come out of your program that indicates that it's really successful. This kind of model and this kind of mindset about young people really works and translates into success. How do you tell us a little bit more about that? So what are some of your favorite student stories of success, or maybe not success, or do you have any individual favorite stories? I would be really curious to hear about how some kids have embraced the program.
Oh boy, it's like Sophie's Choice, Lucy. Like, is there so many, good stories to tell? Okay, here's a good one. This one is a story about gender too. So, what's interesting is that we know about the gender disparity in technology, of course, but when we look at it from a supply perspective, especially when we're sourcing from underserved communities, we don't really know that it's an issue yet. Like, we don't really know that as women that we don't want to go into technology. For the most part, we're just looking for a cool job that we can do and feel good about, and then we want to make a lot of money. It's not until you get into it that you're like, wow, this is really kind of dude-ish, and and then sort of navigating through that. So an example is that one morning I had one of the young men's moms called me up on the phone and said, "Is Jerry there?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm looking at him right now. He's here." And she said, "Good, because I dumped a bucket of ice water on his head this morning, and I said, you are not going to screw this up. You get out of bed and you go to i.c.stars. You can't be late or absent." And that, and he's like soaking wet, and he's like, "Ma!" And she's pushing him out the door, right? And I was like, well, he's here. Well done, And then maybe like a year later, there was a woman in our program who was just brilliant, like rock star, killing it on the leadership, on the business and the technology, like the star of her class. And she was going home every day to her boyfriend, and her language and her self-image and all these things started to change, right? And technology, it's all acronyms, right? So she was like, "Oh my gosh, I met the CIO from CNA today. He was talking about this SAP implementation." And her boyfriend was just like, "I don't even know you. Like, what language are you speaking?" And then she starts to like dream in code, right? Like, and that's a literal behavioral objective that we look for, like when that starts happening, just like learning any language, when you start to dream in it, there's a level of proficiency. So, she's supposed to be having dreams about like Abraham Lincoln and kissing celebrities. And she's like dreaming in code. What is this? So he knows that if she's late or absent, she'll get fired. And so one morning he unplugs her alarm clock to just make this stop. And so she calls, and my whole staff is like, Sandee, don't you do this. Don't you do this. If you fire her, we'll protest, we'll all of this. And she was 15 minutes late. And I knew there was nobody who was going to, like I had to do it, right? And so it was awful. It was terrible. We let her go. And, the staff was just like, you are the worst. They like ate my yogurt every morning. They did everything that they could to like show me like I was not their friend. Well, 2 years later, she calls me and she said, Sandee, I'm sorry. I've owed you this phone call for so long. And I just wanted to say thank you. And I was like, for what? And she said, this was the most important moment in my life, getting fired. Because had that not happened, I would have taken him back and said, it wasn't so bad, look, like what's the worst thing that could have happened? Like I would have rationalized it and made it okay. But what I realized was who's behind me and who's not, who my support system really is, and who's not invested in my success. And I hit rock bottom for sure, but I want you to know that I'm a BA today at CNA. I love my job, and I deserve this because I worked my butt off to get it. And I want to thank you for that foundation. And Lucy,
that is incredible. Yeah. Wow. That there's a reason for everything, how your program is structured, and the life lessons that come from even it just because it's a negative experience doesn't mean it's not going to be a life experience, a positive life experience. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And wow. That is
right.
Amazing. Like
we all have that moment in education where the educational process actually showed us who we are, right? Like it reflected who we are, and whether that happens in the moment or like over the semester or years later, like that's good education that causes us to reflect on who we are.
That's self-awareness. Yeah, absolutely. So what does the typical 9-week program look like? You don't have to go into super detail, but like I'd be really curious as to like how you bring a group in, how you build community amongst them, how it sounds like there's some pretty tight structures on things so that they learn how to operate in a business environment. I would love to know about what that looks like.
Sure. So yeah, we have 3 major modalities for our model. So one is traditional classroom instruction. And so we call it night school, where, that's when folks are learning programming fundamentals and just kind of like the fundamental things, workshops. And then there's the experiential competency-based project where, the client is pushing those deliverables. And, they will be asked to create, 20 user stories by Wednesday. And they're kind of like, what on earth is a user story? I don't even know what that is. Well, what they're learning in their first week of fundamentals is like learning styles and management styles and how to adapt communication for different audiences and how to build trust, how to, all of these systems of learning, leading, and designing. And then, that Friday, they're divided up into their teams and they get the RFP and form their companies. And then the third modality is just-in-time learning. And so this is driven by the learner. So the learner would say, okay, the client asked me to do 20 user stories. And here's what I learned. I Googled, I found this out, I got this, I've gotten this far, but this is where I want to go and I'm stuck. And at that point, that would trigger us like either delivering a workshop or bringing in a subject matter expert to take them through the last mile. But the difference here is the learner is driving that. And that's much more work than school, right? So you can see like kind of you go from the classroom instruction that is much more like traditional school to work modalities like working on a project and then just-in-time learning, where we're really learning how to ask for help, and how to find the resources to get us over the hump of being able to deliver what we need to deliver at work. So a typical day is like, we meet in the morning and then it's project work. Like it looks like any other software company. Maybe there's a workshop in the morning or the afternoon that's in the just-in-time category. But really learning how to manage our own time is essential. And then at 4 o'clock, as you alluded to earlier, Lucy, we have high tea. And this is the hour every day where we have a different business, technology, or community leader come to the table and share their journey. And that it's all about reciprocity. So nobody introduces themselves. You introduce the person next to you, even if like 20 minutes before tea, you're ready to strangle them. Everything is elevated because this could be their next employer. And so it's all about like, how do I position this person next to me as the person you need to have on your team? And, it's really powerful. And, by the end of tea, the speaker who's coming in thinking they're going to give a lecture, like these are the 10 things everybody should know, is kind of blown away and has a much more intimate and authentic conversation because of the work that the learners do. And I think when we talk about transformational education, to me, this high tea is the model for it, because it flips the script from I am the student, I'm like kind of learning, absorbing, to I'm facilitating transformation here. And it's the transformation of the leader who's coming to the table, so that on their way back to the home, to the suburbs or whatever, they're thinking, what is my legacy? Like what what is it all about? And what am I doing for others? And that was driven by our learners. So we sort of get out of that, like we're kids, we're students, and that we're a powerful force in helping people see things that they might not have seen before. And then after tea, there's like a debrief and then like more learning workshops.
Wow. Oh, wow. It's amazing. So how many kids have gone through this program, or how many young people? I guess it's not kids. 18 to 25-year-old range, right? Is the typical age. They have to have their GED or high school diploma, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then, so how many have gone through? And then how did your expansion into Milwaukee and Columbus happen? And how is that going too? Because I think that's, why Columbus, particularly, I'm curious. Because I'm excited to see that you've expanded, because this model seems to be really tight and effective.
Thank you. Yeah. So I would say about 900 folks in Chicago have gone through, or we consider leaders, have graduated and become alums of Icy Stars. And that's Chicago. So, we were founded in Chicago. And then our first expansion city was Columbus. And it's all been a pull model. So, cities approach us all the time, and we kind of do a feasibility study and kind of look in to see, like, what does the market look like? What's the demand side? What kind of technology jobs? And then on the supply side, so what does the community look like? How is the community collaborate? What are the workforce development organizations? And what does technology training look like? So Columbus was fascinating because while they had a lot of emerging growth businesses and companies were really growing, they couldn't find talent, because Columbus was a city where, even though they have a great university system, a lot of those kids were coming to cities like Chicago after they graduated. So there was a real drain on talent. And, the boot camps weren't that interested in those sort of smaller cities like they were like the big cities, right? So there was a real need for training. Now that's a little bit different now. Like we're starting to see more of the boot camps kind of moving into that space. But Columbus was a great city because there was so much innovation happening in technology, and a real appetite to bring the community together. And i.c.stars could really be that hub. So, we really do cultivate relationships with technology executives and technology service providers to teach, to volunteer, to mentor, to come and have high tea with us. We do thought leadership events every quarter for them. So like, that's the other side of our business, is being right at the pulse of the market and being able to facilitate conversations with technology executives about the future of technology and what we should be training our folks for. And our students are always at the center of every one of those conversations. So it's very cool. And Columbus were actually, they were opened as their own 501c3 nonprofit. And what we realized was we want to be a national organization and have all of our satellite cities sort of roll up into i.c.stars National versus a bunch of separate entities, right? Like I thought naively, like, well, we'll just enable other folks, give them the playbook and like off they go. But, you know, that was just probably a little bit optimistic in terms of kind of people growing things and everything else. So Columbus is in the midst of transition between kind of closing down the 501c3 and then coming under the national umbrella. And Milwaukee is about to start their 10th training cycle, and they're killing it. In fact, I just was in Milwaukee last night, took the cohort out to a Red Lobster dinner. It's a long story, funny joke about Red Lobster, but I had a blast with them, and they're getting ready to graduate next week. And it looks like our next city is going to be Kansas City, which we're also very excited about. And that's like, you know, a little bit longer of a schlep from Chicago, but well worth it. And yeah, so, and I think our real, our niche is that smaller city that there's a drain on talent, but there's no drain on innovation and companies looking for talent and wanting to really grow in a powerful way and recognize that there's talent sitting in our own backyard, and that we don't need to necessarily outsource and all of those things, that we just need to invest.
You need to grow your own, and
Yeah.
we're seeing this. I just went to a session at the ASCD conference about Evanston growing their pipeline of teachers, you know, that are equity focused and in partnership with Northwestern and National Louis, and that just makes a lot of sense. Like craft the program that you want teachers to go through so that they're prepared to teach and serve the kids that you have in your district. It's the same kind of thing. How do you craft that pipeline of whatever kind of worker you're looking for? Which also made me think, I was thinking about schools and this. In school IT situations, and Alex can probably attest to this, it's difficult to find IT personnel to help manage networks and do all the technical sides in schools. And now, you know, maybe 10 years ago when I first met you, there weren't as many network schools, but now everybody is. And one common source has been for people to go raid the Apple store and find former Apple employees to come work in schools. But have you guys ever thought about like preparing, you know, I don't know how you would make the shift from a corporate kind of project, but schools really need IT personnel. Has that ever come up in your discussions about how you could work with schools to send some of your people that way?
Yes, and you're so right. And you know, I would say we've had a good number of our alums who actually went to go work in schools and be the IT guy, gal kind of thing. Like it's a great role coming out of icy.stars, even though we're more software than, you know, kind of like infrastructure stuff, but like that is it's a great role. And I would love to even think about some partnership where a certain number of our folks were going to work at CPS because, or schools, because it's a dual thing here. Like it's also, you know, leadership and technology, and, you know, having someone who looks like you in the school who's doing technology, who's just like boy, if that doesn't spark an interest in technology, to see someone, you know, some cool 20-something-year-old, I don't know what would. Like that could be a game changer, you know?
Yeah, yeah, go ahead, Alex.
No, the hardest part of that is getting the skill set down The certifications and the pieces that you need to focus on are much more career tech prep of doing like the A+ certification, the basic network plus certification, the security plus certification. And those are, I don't want to sound negative about it. There's not as much innovation there. It is really a memorize and apply directly. And if you don't have those, if you're not in the environment where you're memorizing and applying directly to that, you're not going to get the knowledge and the experience that you need. It almost needs to be like an internship type thing or others. It's why student-based help desks and student-based training things take off, and those people go into support very much because they're that experience. You can't replace that experience. The paper certification, it's like somebody who's never student taught but has their teacher certification. How do you know what they're actually going to do in the classroom from that perspective versus from what I can understand from the i.c.stars program, you're really looking at, you're developing all the other skills that person needs, all those soft skills, all those pieces that you need to be that successful technology person in a school and everything else. I kind of like that part better than and because your school environment is so, I'll call it locked down and strict, that innovation option is only available at certain levels. So you're really, or certain types of schools, being an independent school or a charter school, you might have a lot more freedom to be the experimenter versus when you're in the public school, you would better be doing what the expectation is.
Yep.
There's not a lot of opportunity for variability. And I think that's where we do a disservice to the students who are doing tech and want to do the infrastructure and other things. You have to create that sandbox for them to gain the experience and play or to test out.
That's right.
Interesting.
I completely agree. Yeah. And it's interesting because I think the we're looking at like 5% of our folks go into more help desk roles, 5 to 10%. And they're usually coming to icy.stars maybe with an A+ certification or something. Like there seems to be, it's more accessible for people to get to the hardware side and that they want to make the leap to software. And it's a good foundation because they actually have more discipline. Like they're coming with kind of that, like, the very disciplined approach to things. So yeah. And then what I found is that what excites them and kind of their sandbox and place to think about big things, bigger and innovation is in cybersecurity. So like kind of taking those building blocks and saying, all right, how now do we incorporate all of our experiences to build on that? So yeah, I think that's really
so where do most of your graduates go? I know my husband used to work at Mesero until they laid him off. And I know that you guys had a partnership with Mesero at one point. He's a business analyst actually at Nuveen now. So where in Chicago or Columbus or Milwaukee are your graduates going? Where you said some are going in. I'd be curious as to where they're landing.
Yeah. So United Airlines just hired like 5 people out of our last cohort. Accenture has always been our biggest employer, and it's a nice next step because they're just so good at kind of onboarding entry-level talent and growing talent within that organization. The apprenticeship programs that have been started with Aon and Accenture, Zurich, are really very powerful, and icy.stars is a key player in those. And then, like Microsoft, of course, and then, some of the interesting side things that we're seeing, some of our alums are getting strongly recruited to go into recruitment role, into staffing technology, because they can speak both languages. And they're really good at identifying talent and kind of getting people hyped. So I always think that's interesting. But yeah, and then in Milwaukee, like Northwestern Mutual is a big employer of icy.stars. But yeah, so there's like the bigger CIO organizations, and then there's the technology service provider organizations. that are hiring quite a bit. And right now, the market is so hot. Like, we don't have anybody on the bench in Chicago. Like, I have to tell employers, you got to wait another 4 months. And so it's causing us to think, all right, how do we shore up another cohort so that we can serve more people to meet the demands?
That would keep you even more busy. How many staff members actually run your cohorts? I mean, how many people are involved in the day-to-day of those, of the, that 12-hour day that the students are, in your offices?
Yeah, so there's a program manager and a technology manager, and then like a tech fellow who kind of supports that. We have a case manager, a recruiter, and then a workforce development manager. And that's kind of our standard core group of people who run the program. But then I would say, 100 volunteers plug in as subject matter experts, as workshop or like mock interviews and things like that. And then of course, high tea guests. So it really does take a village.
That's awesome. So what can we do anything to help support your program, or is there anything that we can, I don't know what we could do, tweet you out on social media or whatever. I mean, I'm trying to think specifically, the conversation between, K-12 and programs like this doesn't seem to happen. In my world, I don't see that happening a lot. And I think it should be. I think we need to understand that there are different ways of going about being successful, that maybe a traditional 4-year school is not necessarily the be all and end all. If you want to leave us with some final thoughts, or does anybody have any questions they want to ask in the chat too, by the way? I think we've covered a lot of territory, but if you have questions, put them in the chat and we'll get to them. But in the last 5 minutes or so, Sandee, tell us what we could do, or how could K-12 education help your organization in some way?
Well, so I think, you're spot on when you say the connection between K-12 education and workforce is fractured. Like, and I don't know why. Like, we're all one, as far as I'm concerned, right? Like, it's all connected. And so, finding ways to connect, I think, is right. And so, I would say, if any of you know of a really bright change maker who is looking for an opportunity to do something big, and to move into a technology career and be a change agent, like, send them our way. We'd love to, like, even come out to schools and talk about, like, geek is chic, and bring our young people to kind of to spark interest and passion for technology, and for volunteer projects. Like, we would love to come and work with kids and do things using technology to better our communities. And so we're always looking for fun ways to connect both, so yeah, like, we'd love to work more with you guys. We'd love to think about a channel partnership where, you're sending your Icy Stars-ish folks our way. And yeah.
That's perfect. And I'm thinking of, here in Illinois, there's like, I don't know if they did it this year because of COVID, but there's a student-run technology conference that features kids, and they used to do it in different, like, they did one like in Joliet, and then one up in like Forest, and then one somewhere else. I don't know what the status of that is. I took my kid to it one time and it was awesome. And that would be kind of like, and they usually have a keynote speaker of some young person who's doing something interesting with technology. And that would be like a really nice marriage for you guys to have a partnership with them. And I'm blanking on the name of it. I'll find it and I'll send it to you. But we'll keep in mind, I think there are a couple of takeaways here. One is we can send people your way. 2, we can think about partnership opportunities for volunteering and spotlighting the young people in your program. And then, the third piece is that third piece, I'm thinking, my brain is not operating on all cylinders right now, but I think those 2 things we can do for you. But the other takeaway I have for this is your design of your program, of how interactive it is, how the different elements of teaching are in there. Like, that's something we should be thinking about in K-12 schools as redesign classrooms and redesign programs, and we hopefully are resetting from the pandemic. I think there's something to be said about just the tightness of how you have things organized from a curricular perspective and from a student perspective. It's fascinating to me. So I'm really glad that we had this chance to reconnect, and let's go out for lunch one day or something and chit chat some more. And we'll do, and if we can do anything for you, just let us know. I'm going to stop recording, but thank you, Sandee, for coming. We loved having you here and hearing your story.
Thanks for having me. This was so much fun.